hangs such a carrot in front of this rat cornered and uses this carrot to show how to get out of this corner. And if you don't let it out of this corner, what will we get next? Approximately a 5 million strong Russian army, or perhaps even 10. And excuse me, who will hold it back? Ukraine will collapse immediately because we are barely holding it back as it is. And if you significantly multiply this biomass, and therefore Ukraine will no longer withstand it, because due to the fact that the deep-seated internal corruption and widespread inefficiency of the governmental system has unfortunately led us to the critical point where, regrettably, we no longer possess the necessary resources and capabilities to effectively mobilize our efforts and resources to the next and more advanced level. Everyone sees what's happening with the basification. That is, there is no chance to increase the number of troops by, say, 500,000. We don't have a single chance at all. That is, to hold on. If nothing was happening with them and nothing was happening with us, then yes, we could continue fighting like this for a long time. But things are happening with them. Putin will be forced, if the war goes beyond June, to move towards mobilization. In order to do that, he will be forced to turn Russia into North Korea. And when it becomes North Korea, he can mobilize not just 100,000 or 500,000, but maybe even 5 million. And having, as it were, once this has happened, he needs to keep fighting, and preferably successfully. Then I believe the force will appear towards the Baltics and towards Poland. I think he will only avoid Scandinavia. There, the theater of military operations is complex and more resilient fighters will stand in defense.
But let's not forget that if Putin goes into such chaos, it's already understood what economic resources he certainly relies on and relies heavily. Yes, Russia has enormous resources, but there are also many destructive tendencies gradually accumulating there.
Military communism, indeed, Yura. Military communism. Internal resources are definitely enough to support 140 million people. Unlike during the famine period, Russia is one of the largest food exporters in the world. So it can feed itself easily. People can be made to work not only for money, but also for rations. Yes, for rations. For ration cards. You can come up with some kind of jewelry there. A medal for battle. Labor is cast from the same metal. In fact, it actually has enough internal instruments and tools to transition the Russian Federation into a North Korea-like regime. Another question I repeat, if you look at this strategically, when these 5 million mobilized are put into the ground and say they won't fight anymore, they're tired of it. And when will they do this? When they become experienced fighters. That is, not freshly recruited, mobilized with wide-eyed confusion running wherever they're driven. In 3 years, anyone's eyes will no longer be wide with confusion. They will be an experienced soldier. Someone you can't easily intimidate with a penal battalion, who might even organize a unit to go out at night and eliminate that penal battalion. But just so that it doesn't interfere with the AWOL from running after the AWOL. Moonshine. That is, it will be a new quality. In 3 years, he will have 5 million armed people who hate the government. This is reminiscent of the year 1917 of the last century. Therefore, I think he won't go for it. Well, not that he won't go for it. He really doesn't want to go for it. Because he plans to live not just for the next 2 years, but maybe another 20 years, and leave heirs and their families prosperous. But here he indeed has a direct path to collapse. The only interested party in this might be China. Perhaps in the sense that if Russia falls apart, specifically through centrifugal collapse, yes, then China might reclaim its northern Manchuria, and at the same time gain control over everything beyond the Urals. And in general, when Putin has to flee somewhere, he doesn't have many options, and he might, like Yanukovych fled to Russia with Crimea, Putin might flee to China with Primorye.
On the other hand, we see that Trump is actively maneuvering and trying to make a deal with Putin precisely regarding China. And this deal is in the spirit of the games played by Roosevelt, Roosevelt-Nixon with Kissinger. And we can also recall Truman with Acheson when they were also addressing the triangle issue with China, with the USSR, when they maneuvered with Chairman Xi in the end. With Lilia, and then a year later, he was already needed in the context of the Korean War in 1950. And in general, the stakes are undeniably really extremely high here because Trump is actually in fact offering Putin quite tempting things, which are significantly hard to resist, because it's the recognition and admiration he loves in the eyes of the USA. And oil and the opportunity to export oil and gas to premium markets, albeit with the mediation of the USA, because schemes are being formed where the states will play the role of a mediator that specifically receives its margin from the relaunch of these gas flows. In fact, if we specifically consider the Nord Stream, as we all are aware, does, and the Ukrainian GTS, which obviously means that the Ukrainian GTS will also be in the same scheme.
Yes, yes. By the way, yes, no one has mentioned the Ukrainian GTS yet. That's it. Those rare earth metals there are indeed nothing compared to the Ukrainian gas transportation system. If the concession, at least the transport capacity, is handed over to American business, there will certainly, definitely be a guarantee of security. But our wealthy oligarchs don't want to let go of it, and they are not willing to relinquish their hold on it, as they have been feeding off this stinking gas.
Sorry to interrupt, but the situation has actually changed, because this shirt is already empty, and therefore there's nothing to feed off anymore, so...
Yes, now. I must admit, I concede to President Donald Trump that currently the pipeline is quite empty. If you come up with something to do with it, we'll split it in half.
They're no longer splitting it in half. They've already figured everything out. In this regard, these ideas and maneuvers with the fund and the scheme for the Nord Stream are certainly already in place. Indeed, it's just not yet widely covered in the media, although information is already leaking into the Western media.